أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. ثم أما بعد. In a word, illustrious, mentioned more than 60 times in the Quran, he is described by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala كان أمة قانتا لله حنيفا وَلَمْ يَكُنْ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Being an ummah, being devoutly obedient to Allah, being inclined towards the truth, sincere in devotion, a worshipper based on knowledge, and not having ever associated any partner with Allah. شَاكِرًا لِأُنْعَمِهِ اجْتَبَاهُ وَهَدَاهُ إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. Being grateful for Allah's favors, chosen by Him, being guided to the straight path. وَآتَيْنَاهُ فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَإِنَّهُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ لَمِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. Having a lot of goodness granted to him in this world, being distinguished as one of the most righteous servants in this world and in the hereafter. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ دِينًا مِمَّنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ. He is the one whom Allah Azza wa Jal chose. وَاتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا, as his close friend. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, the man whom even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam physically resembled, and whose way of life could be better than that of he who submits his whole being to Allah, who does good and follows exclusively the way of the prophets, i.e. the Prophet Ibrahim, the one inclined to the truth, whom Allah took for a close friend. And what better a story to highlight in these blessed days of Dhul Hijjah than the story of our father and Prophet alayhi salam. Prophet Ibrahim's story is one that is all-encompassing. To know his story is to know the stories of our mother, Sarah, our mother Hajar, Prophet Ismail, Prophet Ishaq, the Kaaba, Hajj and Umrah, Ma' Zamzam, the Udhiyah and others. To know his story is also to know the story of mankind as we know it. Who doesn't trace a connection back to Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam? Upon him be the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But do we know the truth of his story? From the bits and pieces we know, how do we tie them all together and understand the full picture in order to extract complete benefit? If we look at the full picture, we will gain a greater appreciation of our deen, of life and its purpose, its challenges, and most importantly, our collective heritage. Prophet Ibrahim lived in an era that was approximately 10 generations after the generation of Prophet Nuh. Born into a pagan society in the land of Babylon or Ur, located in the approximate southeast of Iraq, all people at that time worshipped either celestial bodies, idols, or tyrant kings such as Namrud. Therefore, there were none upon the earth at that time who worshipped Allah. Namrud, who was the tyrant, the dominant tyrant at that time, was a ruler of a flourishing industrial and business empire, and has been mentioned by the scholar Mujahid ibn Jabr, rahimahullah, as being one of the 4 great ancient rulers of great kingdoms, alongside Nebuchadnezzar, Dhul Qarnayn, and Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam. Throughout his life, Prophet Ibrahim moved with his family between the lands of what we now consider modern-day Iraq, Turkey, Syria and Palestine, Mecca, and even Egypt. When he was born, this tyrant king Namrud had ordered, similar to Fir'aun, that any boy that was born among the people should be killed due to the appearance of a star in the sky, which had been interpreted by the magicians and astrologers of his court to indicate the birth of one who would destroy Namrud and his kingdom. For this reason, the scholars mention that Prophet Ibrahim's father hid his pregnant wife in a cave for fear of this order. During these early years, he alayhi salam grew quickly, and his intellect developed in a way that was blessed and not common in children. After about 7 or 10 years, he and his family returned to living with the people of Ur. It was during this time that Prophet Ibrahim began to ponder upon the relationship between the worshipper and the worshipped, and to wonder why his family and his people blindly worshipped that which did not make any sense. He began by questioning the stars, the moon, and the sun. He began by realizing that these were not gods due to their inability to always be present or responsive, due to them being directed and controlled by a higher power. And because of this, at a young age, he disassociated worship with them. He then turned his attention to the many idols that his father manufactured and called to the worship of on account of being a priest of their religion. Just as he did before, he began questioning these idols. He asked them, "Why do you not eat the food that is left for you? Why do you not speak when you are asked of?" After much thought and deduction, he was guided by Allah to be a prophet and made the decision to plainly show his people the error of their ways. And what a decision. One that would become a narration etched in our history and to stand the test of time as a story taught and remembered by all of creation. First, he called to his parents. He lovingly said to his father, "Ya abati, my dearest, beloved, and respected father, why do you worship that which cannot hear you, see you, benefit you, or even harm you?" His father responded to him with harshness and rejected his da'wah. Despite the difficulty of doing so, he reached out to his family before anyone else. He then devised a plan to show just how foolish idol worship was to his townsfolk. On the eve of a yearly festival, wherein the people would go out of town, Prophet Ibrahim stated to his father that he was sick, and in parentheses, of idol worship, and remained behind a necessary fib, while everyone else proceeded. After the departure of the people, he secretly approached the place where the idols were kept and began breaking them one by one with an axe, all except for the largest of them, and then left that axe hanging upon it, in the hopes that when the people returned, they would see clearly what had happened. And so they did. They returned from their festival, and they were shocked by what lay before them. One of them mentioned how they had heard Prophet Ibrahim saying to himself that he would outwit them and their idols. When they confronted him, they did so in a public assembly, in order for all of the people to witness the penalty for such behavior. He took the next step in his brilliant plan to now give da'wah to his entire town. The leaders of the town proceeded to ask him if he had in fact destroyed their idols. He simply pointed to the largest idol and how the axe was hanging from it, and said that they should ask the idol if in fact it could speak. The people were embarrassed at their inner realization that these idols they worshipped were powerless and therefore not divine. But they reacted to Prophet Ibrahim with denial, to which he replied, "Do you worship that which you have carved out with your own hands, that which you yourselves have made? Shouldn't it be the other way around? Aren't you both creations? Therefore, shouldn't you worship the Creator?" After their shock, followed by their denial, the anger of the people, with the force of the priesthood of the father of Prophet Ibrahim at their lead, directed them to make the decision to burn him alive in a massive bonfire the size of a small village. Can you imagine how he must have felt being rejected by his own father and his own people? How his loving mother would have felt seeing her child being persecuted before her very eyes. The people gathered so much wood and oil that it took days to complete the construction of this fire. When the fire was finally lit, in some narrations, the scholars mention that the sparks of the fire seemed to be touching the clouds. Then they brought the first catapult that some scholars mention that was ever built, shackled our beloved Prophet ﷺ in chains, and catapult him into the air. All the while, Prophet Ibrahim kept remembering Allah with his heart and with his tongue, with the following words, "Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel." He was launched into the air, and then he uttered these words that have been commemorated in our deen by our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a remembrance to mention when one is going through intense difficulty. Allah is sufficient for us, and how excellent a protector He is. The angels were waiting for the command from Allah to come down, to do something, to send rain, to put out the fire. Even Angel Jibreel flew to the Prophet Ibrahim mid-air and asked him if he wanted to be helped by him. To which he replied, "If from you, no." Meaning, he was firm in his expectation, his yaqeen, that Allah would be there for him. قُلْنَا يَا نَارُ كُونِي بَرْدًا وَسَلَامًا عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ, Allah said, that, "O fire, be cold and be a place of safety for Ibrahim." Before the angels could even do anything, Allah commanded all fire on earth, not just that one, all fire on earth to be cool and safe. Some of the scholars mention that on that day, no people anywhere on earth could benefit from the heat of fire, and that fire only burnt the chains that were shackling Prophet Ibrahim, that he only sweat a little from the fire, and that in the fire, Angel Jibreel was accompanying him and periodically wiping the sweat from his forehead, alayhi salam. All the while his mother is witnessing this still. And she calls out to him, says, oh my son, I want to come to you. So pray to Allah for me to be safe from the heat of the fire. To which he did. He raised his hands to Allah and he made dua. And so his mother was able to enter the fire. And she came to him without being harmed from the heat of the fire, embraced him, kissed him on his forehead, and comforted him, and then returned. Even his father, some narrations state, upon seeing this, upon witnessing this miracle, according to some narrations, he said, "How good a Lord is your Lord, O Ibrahim." He attested to that, though he was a priest of their pagan religion. Prophet Ibrahim mentions later on in his life that no days in his life were as good and as peaceful as those 40 days he spent in that bonfire. The idol worshippers were unable to do any further harm to him after this, as they had been humbled. Prophet Ibrahim continued to call his father and family to the deen of Islam, to ask Allah for his father to be forgiven, and even visited them oftentimes long after having moved away. But when it became apparent to him that his father would not change, he ceased to make dua for him. A sad but important point to take in, because he, alayhi salam, realized that hidayah belongs solely to Allah, no matter how desperately we want someone we love to be guided. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وتسليما كثيرا ثم أما بعد. After these pivotal days in the early years of Prophet Ibrahim's life, he went on to marry our mother Sarah alayhi salam, who is described as being one of the most beautiful women on the face of the earth at that time. And he taught his nephew, Prophet Lut alayhi salam, the knowledge which would prepare him also to be a Nabi to the people of Sodom. He challenged and defeated the tyrant king Namrud, who, according to some narrations, ruled the entire world for close to 1,000 years. What an incredible feat, which he achieved through the help and guidance of Allah, and via a similar fashion to how he proved the weakness of idol worship to his father and the people of his hometown. He then moved through the lands of Turkey, Syria, and Egypt, where he and Sarah alayhi salam encountered another tyrant and defeated them, and then was joined by our mother Hajar alayhi salam, with whom they migrated to Palestine. After 60 plus years of age, he was delighted by Allah with the birth of his sons, Prophet Ismail alayhi salam and Prophet Ishaq alayhi salam. He fulfilled his devotion to Allah by following through with the order to leave his wife Hajar and their infant son in Mecca alone, and was rewarded with being tied to the legacy of the well of Zamzam. He fulfilled his devotion to Allah by proceeding with the order to sacrifice Prophet Ismail, but being pardoned at the last moment. My dear fathers and mothers, can you imagine going through that exact situation? Being commanded by Allah to prove your devotion to Him by sacrificing your own child? Some of the scholars mention that Allah didn't actually ask Prophet Ibrahim to do the sacrifice himself, meaning he could have had someone else take care of the task. But due to his earnestness, he refused to let anyone else take on this most difficult task. A lesson to parents that they should be devoted to Allah in all scenarios and lead their families by example if they hope for themselves and their families to be guided, and if they sincerely hope to please Allah. Also a lesson to children that when their parents inform them of something that Allah has ordered us to do, they should respond with obedience, with ta'ah, like Prophet Ismail did at such a young age. He responded by saying something to the likeness of, "My father, let's fulfill the command of Allah." His devotion and conviction was then rewarded with the ajr of the udhiyah of Eid al-Adha in this blessed month of Dhul Hijjah and its first 10 days. He built the first masjid ever to exist in Mecca, the Kaaba, and was rewarded with having the establishment of Hajj and Umrah attributed to him, his wife and child, alayhimus salam. His grandson, Prophet Ya'qub, built Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, which added to his legacy. He went on fulfilling the command of Allah in Palestine and Mecca, witnessing the mission of his nephew, Prophet Lut, and witnessing the destruction by the angels of the people of Sodom, who were committing and spreading one of the worst sins known to man in the act of homosexuality. He went on to marry additional wives after the death of Sarah alayhi salam, and through them had many more children. After living for 175 plus years, he was laid to rest next to his wife Sarah in the town of Khalil, also known as Hebron in Palestine, where his son Prophet Ishaq alayhi salam would also be buried upon his death. Prophet Ibrahim's story is one with so many details that we need much more time to properly address it. But to wrap up the stories mentioned here and to make a full circle to the points mentioned earlier, we can say this: Prophet Ibrahim lived a life of legacy that all of mankind can be connected to and learn crucial lessons from. From him, mankind flourished in every direction. There was not a prophet except that they were a direct descendant of Prophet Ibrahim. There wasn't a nation except that they were taught the same teachings as was taught by Prophet Ibrahim. There isn't a group of people alive today who can't draw a line in their history back to this beloved, incredible, and illustrious Prophet of Islam alayhi salam. ما كان إبراهيم يهوديا ولا نصرانيا ولكن كان حنيفا مسلما وما كان من المشركين. May Allah grant us the tawfiq to follow ardently and completely in the pure footsteps of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. May He guide us to obedience of the best of practices and the highest reward thereof in these blessed days of Dhul Hijjah and onward. May He shower us with mercy and relief as He did our beloved Prophet Ibrahim in moments of immense difficulty. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من الراشدين. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون وأقم الصلاة.
Brothers, please move up. The last lane, please move to the right so that we can give brothers who come late to join there. We don't have to go in front of you. And there's no gap, close the gap. If you want to use the prayer mat, you're welcome to use it. So fill the space there. Inshallah.
Can one of the brothers give iqamah?
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
استووا تراصوا تفارقوا. Please make sure the line is straight. Straighten your lines so that the shayateen cannot come in between the gaps and disturb you in the salah. And also please check your phones to make sure that they're on silent. Allahu Akbar. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين وأنذرهم يوم الحسرة إذ قضي الأمر وهم في غفلة وهم لا يؤمنون إنا نحن نرث الأرض ومن عليها وإلينا يرجعون واذكر في الكتاب إبراهيم إنه كان صديقا نبيا إذ قال لأبيه يا أبت لم تعبد ما لا يسمع ولا يبصر ولا يغني عنك شيئا يا أبت إني قد جاءني من العلم ما لم يأتك فاتبعني أهدك صراطا سويا يا أبت لا تعبد الشيطان إن الشيطان كان للرحمن عصيا يا أبت إني أخاف أن يمسك عذاب من الرحمن فتكون للشيطان وليا قال أراغب أنت عن آلهتي يا إبراهيم قال أراغب أنت عن آلهتي يا إبراهيم لئن لم تنته لأرجمنك واهجرني مليا قال سلام عليك سأستغفر لك ربي إنه كان بي حفيا وأعتزلكم وما تدعون من دون الله وأدعو ربي عسى ألا أكون بدعاء ربي شقيا فلما اعتزلهم وما يعبدون من دون الله وهبنا له إسحاق ويعقوب وكلا جعلنا نبيا ووهبنا لهم من رحمتنا وجعلنا لهم لسان صدق عليا الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى سنقرئك فلا تنسى إلا ما شاء الله إنه يعلم الجهر وما يخفى ونيسرك لليسرى فذكر إن نفعت الذكرى سيذكر من يخشى ويتجنبها الأشقى الذي يصلى النار الكبرى ثم لا يموت فيها ولا يحيا قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى إن هذا لفي الصحف الأولى صحف إبراهيم وموسى. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Inshallah, Eid prayer will be Tuesday, and it will be across the street. There is a park there called Alpha Park. That's where it's going to be. There's plenty of parking there, and it will be 8:30 in the morning that we're meeting. So if you are not getting the announcements from the masjid, go to maryamcenter.com, not .org.com, maryumcenter.org.com, and subscribe so you can get all these announcements, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. And we also have we put those things in there just to make it easier for people to donate. Consider to do that. Jazakumullah. How have you been? How's the family? Did you get my email when you were already here? I was going to tell you there is a parking always at the end. That is parking. We want to reserve those for us. But that's space for everybody. I didn't tell you. How are you doing? You have a parking issue? Big property has growing, so many trees, so many branches. Chief, are you leaving? Huh? His father is busy. So nice to see you. Still have your number? Yes? It's good to meet you in person. How are you? Yes.